Hello and happy early Diwali, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Yuan, Columbia College class of 1996 and Columbia Journalism School class of 1998. I am the Vice President for Columbia College Women. Some brief words about CCW. We seek to connect alumni to the college, to one another, and to women at large at Columbia. We provide enriching experiences and benefits that support alumni throughout their lives in both personal and professional endeavors. And we create an engaged community that strengthens the voices and leadership of women at Columbia. Please check out our webpage and consider supporting the Columbia College Women's Scholarships. They are awarded to Columbia College students with financial need and who are interested in women's studies or women's rights. I want to thank our co-presenters of this event, the Asian Columbia Alumni Association and the South Asian Journalists Association. I also want to give a shout out to Thandi Jarrett Abdullali, the Director of Alumni Relations at Columbia College, for all of her support, including behind the scenes today. Now to today's event, a walk down intimacy lane. We have about 100 registrants with classes ranging from the 1970s through the 2020s. Leeza Mangaldas, Columbia College class of 2011, is the author of the sex book, A Joyful Journey of Self-Discovery, published by HarperCollins, and is founder of the intimacy products brand Leezoos. This very month, Leezoos Piari Massager became the inaugural winner of the sexual wellness category at the Elle India Beauty Awards. Leeza has a podcast called Love Matters, featuring guests and discussions on love, sexuality, relationships, pleasure, and social norms. In 2022, she was named among GQ's 30 most influential young Indians of the year, as well as Sexual Health Influencer of the Year at the Cosmopolitan India Blogger Awards. Her YouTube and Instagram channels, which have been promoting sex-positive content for 7 years, have nearly 3 million subscribers and followers combined. You need only visit her Instagram page to see the bottomless well of advice on topics that are typically taboo and unspoken, and she answers readers' questions with wit and humor. And I can't think of a better moderator for this discussion than Gayatri Rangachari Shah, Columbia Journalism School class of 98, a journalist, columnist, and author, as well as my classmate. Gayatri is also based in Mumbai. She is the co-author of Changemakers, 20 Women Transforming Bollywood from Behind the Scenes, published by Penguin Random House, along with Malika Kapoor. During the pandemic lockdown, Gayatri launched her podcast, Uncommon Women, which showcases women trailblazers around the world. Her writings have appeared in numerous publications around the world, including the New York Times. Gayatri has been a contributing editor at Vogue India, Architectural Digest India, and Harper's Bazaar. She has written extensively and broadly, including on culture, leadership, gender, and education. There will be a Q&A at the end. Please drop a question, including your graduating year, into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen during the presentation. Your entry will be visible only to the facilitator. If your question is selected, we will ask it on your behalf. For optimal viewing, please enter full screen mode, and please enjoy the presentation. Welcome, Leeza and Gayatri.
Hi, Leeza.
Hi, Gayatri. Thanks so much.
I just want to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone who is tuning in. I know webinars in 2024 might seem a bit dated since we're post-pandemic, but they're so efficient because here we are, late night in India, and I think most of the audience, if I understand correctly, are from maybe the United States, or at least a different time zone from us. Which is probably a daylight time zone. So anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in. I just want to start by saying that it's a very auspicious day that we're actually chatting, Leeza and I. It's Diwali week here in India and of course around the world. It's Dhanteras today, which is an opportunity to honor the wealth that sustains us, which is not just wealth, material wealth, but health that, basically the life force that propels us forward. So Dhanteras is a day to honor the prosperity and health and happiness that propels us forward in our lives. It also happens to be my late mother-in-law's 94th birthday. So a double whammy. So Leeza, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for
I
having
thought
me,
long and hard. I
Gayatri.
thought long and hard about how to prep. I was like, should I be wearing sexy lingerie? Should I wear red lipstick? What's it? Of all the conversations I've moderated in my life, this topic is definitely not something that I ever thought I would be addressing. We have, of course, an age gap between us. So I think maybe your generation is much more comfortable about some of these subjects than my generation was, at least growing up our part of the world. So anyway, having said that, I said, okay, forget it. We're not going to think about any of those things. I did slap on a bit of red lipstick. I like the fact that you and I are both kind of in the same, like strappy, whatever we're wearing. It's hot in India, so in Bombay at least. So we're basically kind of twinning in black and red. Anyway, so thank you. I want to start by asking you, Leeza, you went from being an English/visual arts major at Columbia College to becoming one of India's foremost sex educators. Walk us through that journey. How did you come to this pass?
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be able to speak to Columbia alum because my time at Columbia was such a formative 4 years, and I think it really, in so many ways, is the reason I do what I do today. One of my first experiences as an incoming freshman, literally the first week on campus, and I had never been to the US before, let alone New York City. I did, however, grow up in Goa, which is a very easygoing and beautiful and liberal part of India. So I had the luxury of an extremely relaxed and liberal family and an environment that is not quite typical in India in terms of just like being able to be yourself, and particularly as a woman, and wear what you like, etc. So I came from a context of considerable freedom given the rest of the country and society's expectations here, but it was still incredible to be 17 in Morningside Heights. And the first week of college, there was a consent workshop that the RA on our floor in John Jay held, where the whole floor was seated literally on the floor in the hallway, talking about sexual negotiation and dynamics between young people probably having sexual experiences for the first time, and how important consent is. And then our RA had a bag of condoms on their door. And my second year, I became an RA, and I was an RA for the next 3 years. And I saw firsthand the power of peer-to-peer conversation around sexuality in the body. Columbia also had this amazing resource called Go Ask Alice, where people could ask even the most awkward sex questions, and they'd be answered with such empathy and wit and humor. And I myself.
But sorry, Leeza, I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're an Indian girl, even though you came from Goa and all that. You've gone there, and then there's, you've gone to Colombia, and then you've got, this kind of this spiel, and you've got these condoms and all that. I mean, were you at all taken aback? How did you react? I mean, I'm just trying to go back to those early days. Were you a little bit sort of shocked? I think it's for most people, even in the United States, young women or young men who go to college for the first time, it could be quite intense. So I just want to understand what it might have been like for you in that very first sort of, that first year, being so, getting exposed to so much. So, and so in such a open way.
I think that for me, self-expression and I think my sexuality, my identity have always been things I'm very interested in learning about and talking about. And so I just felt like, wow, I am home. Like I can be who I want to be here. And that is beautiful. It was not shocking to me. It felt like, why can't it be like this everywhere? It was like, this is how it should be. In New York City, you can get on the subway naked, and I don't think anyone would give a damn, right? I think it's the only place in the world where nobody seems to care. Not that I ever did that.
No,
but
I beg to differ. I saw a man walking naked in New York City when I was pregnant with my first child, and I was a little shocked, and someone called the cops. So I don't know about that, but okay, be that as
But
it
you know what I
may.
mean? It's Halloween. Diwali and Halloween are the same day this year, by the way. On Halloween, there's like no pants day in the subway. Honestly, people are so busy just like doing what they have to do that day. And I think there's so many people and so many different people and so many people expressing themselves that I think the taboo and shame and this fear of what other people will think is much lower in a city like New York than it is in most other places I've been, and certainly in most Indian states, right? Where I feel like, unfortunately, the predominant fear that governs how people express themselves is what will other people think. We have a saying for that here, log kya kahenge. And I think it governs how families operate. Parents are like the first bullies most kids have here. They will clip your wings and tell you how to be. And because you have to keep up with the Joneses, right? So anyway, but I digress because nobody told me to say this. I know we're at a Columbia alumni thing, but I truly had like the most incredible undergraduate experience. And to a large part of my non-academic experience was shaped very positively by the fact that I was existing in this environment where I never felt like, as a woman, I had to be in any way different in my behavior. I think in India on a daily basis, I'm so acutely conscious of the gender double standards around, especially how you have to navigate sexuality. And it was just so lovely to be, also there was health services in the building. I got an IUD inserted, no questions asked, no one asked it. Like I was in a relationship at the time and wanted to explore contraception and learned all this stuff. Without having to jump through hoops to access it. And I recognize even within the US, what a utopian environment that is, given the state of sexual reproductive health and rights there right now. So I think that those were maybe the seeds of the power of peer-to-peer education, of easy and safe and informed access to sexual and reproductive health and rights resources, information, conversation, no stigma around having peer-to-peer conversation around this. I witnessed firsthand the power of that. And I think that when I came back here, because I had my first sexual experiences in that context, I hadn't had a relationship before I went to college. So it was almost like reverse culture shock because I hadn't navigated that arena in my own context before. I had never bought condoms. I had never been to a gynecologist. I had never had a boyfriend. So I had those experiences
Which is why I'm so amazed that you were so open. The fact that you
I was
went
a blank
to
slate, right? I had so much. My first experiences were there, so I didn't come in with baggage of negative experiences. I just kind of anyway, pop culture is so predominantly Western to a large extent globally. Like I feel like everyone thinks they've been to New York, even if they haven't. So you're kind of excited about going there and experiencing all this stuff. And so I don't think I was shocked ever. I would just pinch myself. Like I was there on a scholarship. I was just like, wow, like I get to do this. Someone else is paying for me to do this. I get to learn every day and have all this. But I had like the time of my life in college, truly. And I was very nerdy and I studied so hard. I regret not having more fun. But I think the one aspect of my personal life that I did have a lot of fun in was in the relationship department. I was always doing homework, but I made time, made time to also explore my sexuality. So I think that armed with all this experience and information, there was reverse culture shock when I came back here and realized that it's not quite so easy to be a sexually active, unmarried woman. And there's a huge dissonance between. Sorry.
Yeah, and Leeza, that's because you also went from no, please. I mean, this is one of the problems with Zoom is you're not, it's a bit of a lag between the cues. One of the things is that you moved from, after New York, you moved from Goa to Mumbai, right? So I guess it must have been a little bit different. And so tell us a little bit about that, because I know you dabbled in a few different careers before you embarked on this journey. And I really kind of want to understand how that happened and how you kind of landed in the space, which is now blown up.
Absolutely. So So I ended up studying English and visual art, and the themes that my writing and art was focused on were gender and sexuality. So in a way, it informed my academic work. It was just a big part of what I was interested in always. When I came back here, I thought I'd be a journalist actually, and but I was also, I mean, I would have majored in 10 subjects if I could have. Like I absolutely loved just reading and writing and thinking. And I thought perhaps a career in the media and news or some sort of journalism would allow for me to continue to do that. And it was early days of the internet, so nobody really was thinking you could earn a living on the internet yet. Even in 2011 in India, TV and print media still had a stronghold on how on where at least the money was to be made. Nobody was YouTuber or something was not a thing yet. So I interned at a TV station for a few months and then got a job there. That was one of my first jobs. But alongside, I ended up being cast in a movie about sexual violence. Like a lot of things, you're 21 years old, you're open to opportunity. Things, you don't have as much control over your career as you'd like. You're also making the most of the opportunities that come your way. I thought I'd get to present news, but I was put on like luxury brands and car shows and sport, because I suppose the old men at TV channels have certain ideas about what a young woman with long hair who looks okay in a tight dress should be presenting. So anyway, I learned a lot nonetheless. I've been a football presenter. Like there's all kinds of work you do to pay the bills. I quickly realized though that I was not going to be able to tell the stories I care about on Times Now. What a horrible, anyway, like it's really the less said, the better about that TV channel, although it had a monopoly on news media in the country at the time. And so I started a YouTube channel thinking like, I'm sure some people want to have these conversations. I never thought it would be my career. I never thought, like hindsight is 2020, but I did not think when I started that I would ever be able to turn sex education and pleasure into a career. Like I didn't even think that was possible. You don't grow up in India thinking I'm going to start a sex toy brand and write a book about sex and talk about sex on the internet, and this will be a sustainable career. Like I feel so lucky every day that that is the life I'm living right now, because I did not for a minute think that. I thought maybe 30 people will tune in and we can talk about, why nobody seems to know where the clitoris is and like which good gynac we can go to and things like that. But clearly, so many people wanted to have those conversations, and I think it was around the same time that so many the Nirbhaya episode occurred, and I think the collective.
So that's the December 6th, the very horrific rape that happened in I think it was 2012.
Well,
Right, 2012. I think that Leeza is referencing for our overseas audiences, which was a very traumatic event for all of India, where a young woman was raped in a moving bus, and it got the entire country very aghast and just agitated. And so I think that's what she's referencing. Yeah.
I mean, and it was talked about all over the world. At least in my lifetime, it was the first time sexual violence and consent and things, these unspoken words and topics that, even though, of course, they happened, they were not talked about openly, but suddenly this was on the newspapers and people were protesting, and I think there was a whole generation of people that were not going to stay silent about this anymore. And then, Section 377 in India, homosexuality was a crime till 2018. The law was overturned only as recently as 2018. So Section 377 was repealed. The Me Too movement happened. I feel like there was a time when so many people globally, since I'm in India and perhaps that's the context I care most about, it felt like I was one of many people who were just done with the pervasiveness of shame and silence around anything to do with sexuality, rights, health, prevention of violence, etc., and that this culture of shame and silence is not serving us, And so I think that.
So when did you launch your YouTube channel, Leeza? Was it because Nirbhaya, I think, might have been 2012 or whatever. So, I mean, obviously, all these awful things keep happening in our country. Actually, they keep happening all over the world.
I ended up being.
When did you decide?
Sorry,
go ahead.
I happened to be cast in a film, a very small independent film, at the end of 2011 that came out around we were like shooting it when Nirvana happened. It had coincidentally happened to be about sexual violence, and so it was something I was thinking about while I was also doing the TV stuff. I was doing a lot of things to make ends meet, and also because I had so many interests that I wasn't always able to align the professional interests that were paying my rent with my actual interests that I wanted to do. So I didn't get paid a lot to do the movie, but I did the movie. But anyway, it just so happened that Liz got me to write an op-ed piece at the time for CNN about this very topic back in 2012. So it's so interesting how all our paths have converged
Columbia.
over the years. Yeah, just shout out to Liz. I'm such a fan. She's so lovely and has always been so supportive of me, even though she has no reason to be. It's just the Columbia connection, honestly. I was sorry to digress, but I just want to acknowledge this because I think it's so cool. I was in my sophomore year. I did this Columbia experience overseas, the CEO program that the alumni office actually had initiated. I think as was the first year or one of the first years to have that program where alumni all over the world offer internships to current students. And so it was in Hong Kong, and I was working with Time Out magazine actually at the time in Hong Kong because some alum was working there and offered a position. And Liz was with CNN, but would take all of the Columbia experience overseas students out because she was active with the alumni network there. And she was just so wonderful to every single one of us. I think she was able to establish a caring and kind and like somehow enriched each and every student's time there. And I'm again not just saying this because literally like I don't know, 15 years later, how long has it been? 12 years later, we're on this panel together. So somehow, even though we don't know each other that well, it's the Columbia spirit and Columbia connection. She's like always championed my work in whatever way possible. So back then, when I was really nowhere near as I don't know how we define success, but okay, I have some awards and some millions of followers now. Back then, I had this one little movie under my belt. And Liz still thought I was worthy of writing an op-ed for CNN. So anyway, basically, all of this is to say that I always cared about these topics. I was able to find ways to make my work more obviously about these things because it was impossible to get a job in some legitimate and respectable institution that was going to pay me a salary to do this work. So I feel like when you look back at my career, it seems like, wow, she did a bunch of stuff in her 20s. Not sure how football presenting ties into sex ed, but like I had to do what I had to do to ensure that I was able to earn a living while doing my very best on the side to do what I actually cared about. And it took maybe 8 years to become sustainable, but I quit doing everything else in 2020, I want to say. And now I am, just full-time sex lady, sex lady on the internet.
Now you're Leeza Mangaldas. But but let me rewind again. So, okay, so I get it. So you were basically like, exploring a bunch of stuff. And then at the same time, I know that this was a very important topic for you personally. So you started this YouTube channel and you were just playing around with it. I get that. But at what point does it become something where you're like, it's kind of something that you're totally focused on? I see your content today on Instagram, like on your Instagram platform. And obviously, all these issues that you're addressing, they're so revolutionary for a place like India, where we don't discuss anything, even though we're the most populous nation on earth. So clearly, we are busy doing what humans do best. But having said that, we don't talk about any of these issues. So I just keep going back to the kind of the genesis of some of this stuff. So you started out by posting a few YouTube videos. Just walk us through a little bit of those early days. How did that happen?
Yeah, sure. So at the time, Instagram was not a video sharing platform, it was a photo sharing platform. So YouTube was where videos were being consumed. And I actually started making content about like slightly more complicated because I like read so much about sexuality and gender theory and things like that. And I was kind of, I think a little bit removed from, given I understand I have a lot of privilege, like to have an Ivy League education and speak English fluently and many things, right, that are not the case for the vast majority of my fellow countrymen. I think I took for granted a lot of that everybody would know certain things because I just hadn't yet been exposed enough to people very different from
like a baseline, right?
A baseline. Yeah. So I was like, my first couple of videos were about things like, loneliness and non-monogamy and contraception beyond condoms and like little bit, I guess. I mean, I thought, you don't want to state the obvious. So if you're doing something, you want to like explore, dig deeper or whatever. And people were like, we are so here for this, but like, how do you use a tampon? What is the clitoris? Like, please dial it down a notch and let's start like 10 steps before we can get.
You're talking about basic 101 of like basically when for kids, like, yeah. Our bodies ourselves is what, when I grew up, there used to be a big tome called Our Bodies Ourselves that, girls referenced. Sounds like that, like a really basic kind of thing.
Exactly. I got, and also my community grew slowly. I wasn't like an overnight viral hit on the, and I think when you're creating long form content in English about sexuality, it was like a very niche thing. I think I was one of the first people on the internet to do this. I think we've had some incredible activists doing all kinds of work that I'm so grateful. I mean, it's always the generations before you that paved the way so that I can be a young woman on the internet talking about this and not have anything happen to me. So I'm so grateful for the feminism that brought us to a point where I could even do this. But I think I was one of the first to do it. There was no real template for this. And you rarely even saw like brown people being in any way sexual, even in entertainment media here, right? It was still early days there was no Netflix in India and all of this. So we were I think it was a little bit new when I started for viewers to see some Indian girl talking about masturbation or whatever, all the things I talked about. So it was interesting and also I think valuable for me to be able to receive feedback from people who are consuming the content. And you start at zero, right? You have like 300 followers and then 3,000 and then 30,000 and then 300,000 and then 3 million. And it wasn't overnight. So I think that I was able to grow with my audience in this way where I was so lucky to be on the receiving end of so much feedback from so many people and such a diverse sort of a whole range of people, because I think sexuality is such a universal topic. Like it's one of those things which most people have some connection to and are interested in. I think it's very unique in its universality, in that whether you're rich or poor or from the north or south, or whether you're a banker or a poet or whatever, it is still going to factor into your life in some capacity. Even if you're asexual, sexuality is factoring into your life. So I think
I think what you've done very well, Leeza, sorry to interrupt, but what I find really amazing is that you've done it on a platform where you can engage directly with your audience without them ever having to come out, right? So it's very private. You get a lot of DMs. We've discussed this. You get like queries where the queries could be so basic that you even wonder, like, did this person not take a bio 101 lesson, right? But they are able to talk to you directly, and it's a safe space for them. So I think what it shows you is that in a big country like India, people don't have an opportunity to really talk to anybody about some of these very basic things. And so to that point, I just want to ask you, from the early days of when you started your platform, the kinds of queries you got to today, do you feel like there's been a bit of an evolution? How do you feel like the Indian the person who's engaging with you and your platform, the Indian, I guess, I mean, they could be people from all around the world, but how do you have they evolved? Are you feeling like the questions are different? Are people maturing a bit? What are you seeing?
I think there's definitely been some evolution, and I think that, as I was saying earlier, also I think that when you're thinking something, that's very likely many other people are also thinking it, and so these milestone moments like Section 377 being repealed, like Me Too, I think did galvanize lots of young people into recognizing that this stuff matters and needs to be talked about, and I think that. It makes me so happy every time I see more young Indians talking openly about this stuff. I would say, though, that queer people and women, as always, are at the forefront of this change, and unfortunately, too often, straight men are just not getting with the program, much to their own detriment. I think, unfortunately, this sort of evolution that we've been able to see in our own lives as women and queer people in this country. Like when you look at how different my life is from my grandmother's, it's very different, right? I don't think she could have started a sex toy company. She had to quit medical school to get married. Luckily, my grandfather was a lovely man, but it was an arranged marriage. And luckily, she even got to go to medical school for like a minute. You know, most people 2 generations ago who were women in India would probably not have gone to college, would not have gotten to choose their spouse, would not have gotten to opt out of marriage, probably didn't work. I mean, most of my own friends' moms don't work. Like this is your and my lives are not the norm here, right, Gayatri? So I think that when you look at that evolution, or let's say a young queer person who's openly out in India today, it wasn't even legal till 2018. The fight that's had to be fought to get a seat at the table, and the self-awareness and just the journey, I think, is so vast for these sections of society. The receptiveness to the value of this change is just immense. Whereas men, like my brother and my grandfather, my grandfather could do everything and my brother can do everything. You know, there isn't that big a difference. You could go out, do what you like, wear what you like, do most career. I mean, maybe we've become a little bit more open where like it wouldn't have been so acceptable for a man to be a hairdresser or a chef or something. And there was the whole doctor, lawyer, engineer progression. But to a large extent, if you're a straight man, upper class straight man, you have a lot of privileges for the last 300 years. So I think, unfortunately, and I think we see this globally, this is a crisis of masculinity and things being talked about to death. But I think that it is really unfortunate that the idea of women being sexually assertive or women wanting pleasure is still subversive instead of something that we're all okay with. And so I think the only
it's not just sorry, I'm not yeah, so it's not just subversive. I think it's actually dangerous. Most cultures find it extremely dangerous, and this is why in certain parts of the world, they control women's genitalia, so that women don't never ever experience pleasure. And in other parts of the world, women are married as soon as they reach puberty. I mean, by the way, I'm a Columbia graduate, but my own grandmothers were married at the age of 12 and 14, respectively, because that was the norm in the India that we grew, in those days. So I think the world is also rapidly transforming. But what's interesting to me also, Leeza, is that you and I have spoken about some of the things that your own you have now a sexual wellness brand. You have this amazing reference book that this book that you wrote, and I think that you now have opened up through your platforms a way for people to access young women and men to access sort of a way to approach these topics that they can't talk to their parents about. They certainly are not going to talk to their friends about because, our society is such. And I just want to know some of the DMs you get, some of the queries you get. Have you seen, you've been doing this now for a while, have you seen the nature of the questioning change? Do you feel like, or is it still very sort of basic and simplistic? How are you seeing that kind of evolution of that conversation and dialogue?
I think, I would say the change tends to be incremental. It's really radical. So there's some small change. I think I see more questions, if that makes sense. Like I think more and more people feel like, okay, I can ask this question. Okay, I can maybe figure out how to see a gynecologist or buy a vibrator or like ask my partner to do the things I want to do with them, or like why doesn't it feel good for me? Shouldn't it not hurt? Don't I deserve orgasms? I think like before many of us, and particularly women, didn't even feel like they had the permission to ask these questions out loud, to search for this information, to feel entitled to this information, let alone the solutions to the concerns they may have. So what I'm seeing is a much greater volume of questions and more people sharing the content, talking about similar things. Like before, it was a big deal for people to even share one of my reels in their stories. What if their mom sees that they shared a reel about orgasms, you know? They don't even have to make the reel, just sharing it, especially for women, was like a big deal. And I think that still it is easier for men to access this. And a lot of the small majority of my community is actually men. And a lot of women would write to me being like, they found my page because their partner sent it or their husband sent it or something. Like, unfortunately in India, and it's quite interesting, I suppose in many countries where gender equality is not super advanced, men remain the sort of conduit via which women can access sexual and reproductive health and rights information, resources, services, etc. So if you have a partner who is supportive of your access, you're much more likely to have positive outcomes in that regard. Like your brother, somebody has to drive you to the gynac, somebody has to buy the condom, somebody has to even do the search about how do women have orgasms, because this internalized misogyny and conditioning and the consequences are so high that you don't even feel like you can look for that. Like, what kind of a woman knows about likes and talks about sex? Not a respectable woman, not a good girl from a good home, right? So I feel like there's so much unlearning that has to be done, and men have to go on this journey because unfortunately we can't really do this alone. There's so much a part of the problem, they have to be a part of the solution. So I really try my best, even though privately I might be much angrier about how I might want to deliver certain messages. I really try my best to keep those who don't already agree with me as my intended audience, if that makes sense. Because if you're only talking to your dinner table guests, what change are you really creating? Right? You have to get those people who think the opposite of what you think to stop and consider for a second. And I find humor to be a great vehicle for that. I also find that kindness and humor, even to the people I sometimes just like, it's hard, right? Rage is also powerful, but I am choosing humor and kindness to deliver the message, even to people who I really sometimes would rather roll my eyes at.
So I just want to give our audience some context. We operate in a society where it's embarrassing for a woman to go into a pharmacy to ask for, tampons, or forget tampons, sanitary napkins. Like, just the period conversation is starting to get more normalized, but it's still extremely taboo in India. The other thing is marital rape is not illegal in this country. I mean, there are many things that we still grapple with. But you do, Leeza, your Instagram page is full of humor. It's so hilarious. I think it's so witty because you do it also with, you're talking about these issues, but you're doing it with all this subtext and, all that. So how do you come up with this? How do you decide, like, are you sitting there and just thinking about, we want to understand, like, how you kind of devise some of these approaches to address some of these interesting ways to tackle sexuality?
When I started out, I used to actually be much more straightforward. Unfortunately, I'm forced to be very creative, funny, and use a lot of code words and innuendo. And because the American media platforms, like all of Meta's platforms, are now cracking down on sexual health information and content, just as they are on political news-based content when it's not about. Anyway, I won't. This is not that talk. But unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, Meta, Google, Amazon, they're all really sex negative and increasingly so. And you can Google this, there's lots of press about it also. But there's massive gender double standards. And ever since about 2.5 years ago, the censorship on these platforms just like escalated. And now with AI, it's easier than ever for them to figure out what's being talked about, and they throw away the baby with the bathwater just far too often. While perhaps some of the censorship is in place to mitigate any kind of sexual harm, such as the dissemination of revenge porn and things like that, I believe that their tools are sophisticated enough to do better. But right now, it's just like, let's eliminate anything to do with sex, even if it's about rights, even if it's about healthcare, even if it's so based. But how do you? It's so silly to try and silence something on the internet. People will always find ways to talk about what they care about. But yeah, so I have to lean into the humor even more. And I think sexuality is a topic where most people. It's funny how you can you can convey what you're talking about and people know what you're talking about. So it's even, I've had to like lean into the humor even more. I actually really liked being super straightforward because I think there's something to be said about removing the power that words are given when they are meant to be unspeakable, and so just using the names of the body parts and things instead of shying away. Now I can't use them. You can't say penis and vagina on Instagram anymore. So which is very sad. But anyway, it is what it is. And it's really unfortunate though, when you think about it, that in 2024, we still think that some of the stuff is unspeakable, that the right to abortion was under threat 50 years after it was fought in the country of my alma mater that I am so proud of. So there's so many, I feel like all over the world, there's progress, but then there's also some pushback to that progress. And it's not really linear, the progression, right? I don't know, I hope that we always are going more forward than backward, but it can be kind of confusing about how people receive certain ideas, especially when it has to do with the rights and freedoms of women and queer people.
So, to that point, you obviously had some learnings from your platform, and that I think helped to pivot you to your own brand, which is Leeza's. And tell us a little bit about that, what the response has been, because I know that you and I have spoken about the kinds of messages you've gotten from people who have tried Leeza's, the products, and how it's kind of helped them. So if you could share a little bit about that, that would be great.
I'd love to. So I started a pleasure products brand a year and a half ago. And the reason I did so was because among the most common questions I received from women had to do with an absence of pleasure in their sexual lives. Like, I have never had an orgasm. I've been married 10 years. I don't think I've ever experienced pleasure during sex. I stare at the ceiling fan, waiting for it to end. I have 5 kids, but I've never had an orgasm. And this was so common. Oh, why is sex painful? Sex is so painful. It's uncomfortable. When you talk about pleasure, I have no idea what you're referring to, because for me, it's just extremely uncomfortable. So like an absence of pleasure seemed to define many, many, many women's sexual experiences. Either the presence of pain and the absence of pleasure, or definitely the absence of pleasure. And on the other hand, I would get messages from men who would be like, I have never had a girlfriend. I don't, will I be able to please my partner? What does sex feel like? And these would be men in their mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, because in India, to a large extent, marriage is still the sort of landmark after which sex is had. So, according to National Family Health Survey data, over 90% of Indians are having sex for the first time after marriage. I don't know how accurately people are responding to these surveys, but I would say that the adults in a household try and make it very difficult for young people to be sexually active, okay? And they will have to give their approval on who you marry and things like that. And I think the stakes and consequences, especially for women, are so high that even I think perhaps men might be seeking it, but it's not very easy for women to seek or partake, except in,
basically it's still hugely taboo. It's still very, very taboo to have premarital sex. Even, even despite even though urban India is, quite progressive and all that, it's still very much taboo, is I think what you're trying to say.
Much of the country, it's still very taboo. Or you're having to live a double life where you can't admit to being sexually active or having a boyfriend or whatever. I have friends who even went to Columbia who couldn't tell their parents they had a boyfriend in college, or could never bring up. I'm in their 30s and unmarried and cannot have a relationship that they're open about to their parents. So luckily, I did not have any of those problems. My parents are the best. I really got lucky in the parents department, and it would be much harder to do this work if I didn't have parents who, because it's very hard to have to choose between such a fundamental relationship and the work you want to do, right? So luckily, they never ever tried to stop me, only celebrated my work, and totally get it. But
I have a follow-up question for that, but you finished the earlier question, which was around
so men well into their 30s were lamenting a lack of access to sex, and women were lamenting a lack of pleasure in their sexual lives. And I think that the problems are kind of related. And unfortunately, to a large extent, I do wish that I was more queer in the work I do, but that's one, just makes it even harder when and for some reason we're less open about this stuff. So I'm sorry, some of this discussion seems very heteronormative, but let's say people with vulvas seem to have this issue with the absence of pleasure, and people with penises have the issue of lack of access to sex. And I thought that while I can't change society, why don't we at least, because I have benefited so much from these tools in my own life, why don't we at least like tell people about toys and lubricant? And this was way before I started my brand. Like I've been getting these questions for 10 years now. So I mean, the first time I used a vibrator, it felt like my third eye was open. And I was late to the self-pleasure party, honestly. And I'd been sexually active for many years. I'm 34 now. I used a vibrator for the first time at like 26. And I was just like, I didn't know how much pleasure I was capable of, that I could have an orgasm whenever I wanted within minutes. And it was so powerful, that recognition that you don't even need somebody. And that I'm sorry if this is TMI, but like I do this for a living, so I have zero filters. I'd never masturbated, I'd been sexually active and I had never masturbated. And it was so crazy to me that I didn't even know that I didn't know. So I went, like, after I used a vibrator, I was shouting it from the rooftops. I was like, you have got to try this. I also think most women underestimate how vital clitoral stimulation is to orgasm, even if accompanied by penetration. I think it's, for the vast majority of women, it is the most reliable route to orgasm, but we just think penetration should result in orgasm, whether or not accompanied by clitoral stimulation, and then often we fake it. I mean, this is so relatable to so many women, because it's the narrative we've been fed, that what works for him should work for you. And in India, where you have like no privacy, and you're kind of having to do this in hiding and have so little time. And I really don't think women's pleasure gets enough focus. And so for so many
women's pleasure, what's that?
Yeah, what's that? Exactly. So I think it is news to so many people. I feel like the people aren't even aware necessarily of what pleasure feels like, so they don't have something to aspire to. Anyway, so I talked about vibrators and lubricant, like these are the unsung heroes of better, more communicative, more self-aware, sexual experiences. And for men, I think that while most men are able to use their hand to great effect, I think that the curiosity and like build up, like sex, especially for people with lack of access to something, you build this thing up as if it's like the most important and this unattainable thing that you just can't wait to have. Like there's a FOMO and a kind of like overemphasis almost on this event, that I think that by utilizing toys and lubricant and things like that as well, and kind of having a more evolved self-pleasure practice, I think you can experience certain things that, even if you don't have access to a partner. I mean, I think by the time you're 35, if you're somebody who wants to have sex but have no access, you deserve some recourse. So I think for all of these reasons, we have products for all genders, and they're all in extremely high demand. And I wanted to solve for these issues that people were literally writing to me about every day. And but I also
tell us about some of the feedback that you've gotten. I know that you've shared one or two. So what are some of the? Just give us like a 1 cent, like what people have said to you. I mean, women, men, whatever, on private messages.
I'm so excited, I think, to be able to have these experiences of pleasure and joy and self-discovery. People will write to me saying that they, very similar to my own experience the first time I used a toy. Most women who use a toy for the first time will have this sort of epiphany, and write into me saying, I had my first orgasm with Pyari. Like Pyari is our little clitoral stimulator. It's really cute.
Pyari, by the way, means love.
Yeah, Pyari is like my love in Hindi, or lovable or beloved or something like that. But it's cuter than that. The word Pyari is a very cute word in Hindi and very non-intimidating, because as I said, men have to be on board with this. So most men are threatened by the idea of their partner having a toy, but you would hope that like a little Pyari, like how is this? This is not threatening, I have to think very much about cultural sensibilities. I want to show you guys a product that I think was particularly well suited to India, because there's fireworks because it's Diwali, because we have this whole like discreet, the value for discretion. I mean, I guess you would want that anyway. You would want to not be embarrassed if someone found your sex toys. But in India, like if you're living with your parents, which people do well into their 30s and things, the stakes are your kids or whoever. Like people want their
or for the rest of your lives. I mean, it's not like just
exactly. Or for the rest of your life. So people want their toys to be discreet and for them to be able to receive them in very discreet packaging and things like that. So we launched this very tiny but powerful little clitoral stimulator that looks like AirPods. It comes in a little box, so you can literally like put it in your handbag or travel with it or leave it around, and most people are not going to object and not even going to know what it is. But those are the types of things I have to think about that might be to some extent applicable globally, but more acute here. The need for privacy, the need for the toy not to be something a man would be threatened by if the woman is going to be using it, because it's just much more likely that a woman has access to this if her partner is supportive of it. Yeah, so sorry, I am so excited about all of this. I can talk till the cows come home. I know we're getting towards the
So listen, I know we've got a whole bunch of audience Q&A. I've not even opened the chat box, but I quickly want to ask you one final question on my end before I look at the questions that have come in. And that is, look, you are dealing with something that is so important, but it's also very culturally sort of just not at all addressed. Have you felt any harassment because of the, since you've undertaken this journey? And this, by the way, is something that an early question from an alum, Max class of 2008 had also asked. So it was kind of in the similar vein to what I was asking. That was one. The second thing was also, there was a second question that came from very early on from a person who had registered, trying to find the alum's name, but yes, Lee, class of 87, Columbia College class of 87. Have you seen in your, the queries that come to you, if there have been different sort of queries coming from different religious communities, so Hindus versus Muslims? So those are two questions. One was around like just how safe it is around, like harassment you faced. Second is around the religious attitudes.
Actually, it's interesting. I can connect those two questions. I have decided that I'm fighting the battle of like sexual rights and gender equality. And so unfortunately, I will not be fighting the religion and politics battle because I just don't have the stomach for it. So I do not talk about religion and politics on my page. Maybe that makes me a coward, but like it's already a lot talking about this. So I think that as a result of, and we live in a climate right now where any kind of criticism around religion or politics does endanger your safety. And so I have made that choice. And I think as a result, people of all religions and political leanings are more receptive to my message because I think sex is political. I think gender is I think everything is political. And I think religion impacts some of these ideas, but I will talk in general terms about religion instead of targeting a specific religion when I'm critical of the influence religion can have on our beliefs around sexuality, because I think to a large extent, most religions do have a similarly oppressive impact in their most conservative avatars in terms of the impact on sex. So instead of targeting criticism at any one group, I will always be like, you might have inherited some limiting beliefs from whatever religious background your family may lean into, if that's the case. Like I couch it with so much care and trepidation because I do think that one, I value my safety. Two, I am trying to I've picked my battle. And I think that it is very universal, whether you're Hindu or Muslim or whatever. I think lots of what I say is applicable. And I think I am able to be heard if I leave the religion out of it. So I kind of try and restrict my content to what is based in scientific fact. It's hard to, I don't have that many opinions on my page. I mean, I think by virtue of just being a woman talking about sex, even though I'm unmarried, even though I'm Indian, it suggests a certain leaning. And I think my politics are evident to someone who wants to think about my politics. But the content I make is hard to argue with because it is fact. So what I get is a lot of slut shame?
Yeah,
Like I get a lot of slut
yeah,
shaming.
you get, that's what I was going to ask you. You get a lot
I
of
get a
hate.
lot of slut shaming, and I think a certain type of man, doesn't matter what religion or whatever else he's from, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, whatever. There is a certain type of man who wants to slut shame a woman who talks about sex. Is equal opportunity slut shamer.
And is it always men, Leeza? Is it always men?
It tends to be overwhelmingly men. Maybe there's some women, I don't know. It tends to be overwhelmingly men. But it tends also to be something that really doesn't even bother me anymore. Like, I feel like the word slut is something that I don't know. You're gonna do better than that. You're gonna have to do better than that. But and it's just so predictable, and so it's, you know,
So when you
whatever.
get these hideous messages in your DMs or whatever, just block these messages. What do you do? I'm like, is it? It's because some of it is very
I don't
disgusting.
even check my DMs, honestly. It's too many. I just have too large a community to check my DMs unless, and what, because I really value interaction. What I do is I will ask a specific question in my stories or use the question stickers multiple times a week or once a month. And then for like 2 or 3 hours after I've submitted a particular prompt for which I'm eager to find how people see that in their lives or what their thoughts are on a topic or issue or question. So I will have targeted moments where I'm trying to, of engagement with my community. But if I would, unfortunately, I kind of lost the ability to check my DMs all the time or all of it because there's just too many
Right.
people, yeah, slut shamey, just like wait, like I don't have there's only so many hours in the day. I'd have to hire someone to filter. So it's easier for me to just have targeted moments where I'm engaging with, like, on a specific topic that I need people's insights on. I also put my email address in the bio, and most people don't have to take the effort of emailing. So I get much more how should I say, like high quality messages or people who really care and want to discuss something in my email, whereas it's so easy to just be like, shut up, slut, in a DM or in a comment. So I found other ways to engage more meaningfully with my community because that's one of the most wonderful things about doing this work. And I would also say that while honestly, it's not even shut up, slut, it'll be like, I don't know if I can use this language here. Anyway, it'll often be like some flattering messages, but actually you're not like the wrong place, or like you don't really have permission. People just think if you're a sex educator, you're asking for it, and I don't have the time to read like unsolicited sexual in you, whatever, like people coming on to me or whatever. So I think that actually the much more horrible messages, unfortunately, in India come to people who are critical of the government or critical of religion. The rape threats and the death threats are going to those people. And I have opted out of those conversations. Sometimes I think that makes me cowardly, but I deal with enough with this and I value my safety.
Okay, so I think we have time for maybe one question. And I'm going to ask this question from Nancy, who was Columbia College class of 90. What advice would you give young people to encourage them to learn more about their sexuality and to explore their sexual curiosity?
Well, I always, sorry, I want to read the question again, because when we say young people, do we mean children or young adults?
No, I think she probably means, Nancy probably means
okay, sorry.
Who can exercise their own, like who have.
I'm just reading the questions. There was a follow-up question: how to encourage young people from more conservative cultures to have these conversations when it was shunned during upbringing.
Which is exactly how we were raised. I mean, maybe not you, but me.
What I find is that many young people do want to have these conversations to whatever extent possible when they feel safe having the conversations. So whether it's with a best friend or whether it's with someone like me like what I think, I mean, one of my superpowers I feel that I've managed to have somehow is people trust me. I mean, and I would never betray that trust. But like the things people are willing to tell the stranger on the internet, and unfortunately, I cannot respond, and I don't think it would be responsible to respond because unfortunately, you have this like parasocial relationship sometimes with somebody you follow who you don't actually know at all, but you think you know them because you follow them. But I don't know this person. I don't know enough about their health or context or anything to give personalized advice. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a therapist. I'm just a sex educator and a woman and first of all, just a woman like talking about stuff that I think should be general knowledge. So I never pretend to be anything I'm not, and I do not do any kind of consultation or direct advice to people. I will always look at FAQs and make a public piece of content with anonymizing the overarching question, because there's tons of people with the same question, and make it as a reel or a post or an article or something that everybody can consume, as opposed to personalizing any suggestions or advice. But I receive so much like deeply personal information without asking for it, that I think it's clear that people from conservative cultures are just yearning for a space where they can have these conversations. And so I actually also think parents have to be part of this. I mean, I wish that my page and my work was redundant. If parents were doing their job, we wouldn't need me. I think that who else is more invested in the well-being of a young person than the parent, ideally, right? Ideally, you should be able to go to your parent when you need some help, advice, or information about your health, body, relationship, whatever else. And I think, unfortunately, we really fail our kids when we do not sort of find ourselves able to deal with those questions with compassion, and with, even if you don't know the answer, you will
or
find out.
educate them. Like we educate
Exactly.
them in so many different spheres, but we don't
In fact,
educate them in
often
this
we
one part
deliberately
of their life.
we
Yeah.
often deliberately pass on misinformation, shame and fear-laden misinformation. And I mean, I'm not a parent, but and not you, I meant parents often pass on misinformation because it's so taboo.
These are tough subjects, right, Leeza? I mean, they're very tough.
Yeah,
It's
but I
almost
tell
easier
young
to
people.
talk about anything.
Exactly. But sorry, coming back to the question though, I genuinely think of like exploring your own body and identity as a cornerstone of your journey, like before even involving another person, and all the risks to health and emotional equilibrium that can entail, especially when you're very young. I always think just even read a book, even read my book. Think about like, who are you? As outside of who you've been told to be by school and parents and family and all of this stuff, what makes you happy, what makes you optimistic about the future, what angers you, and what turns you on, and what are some of the things you fantasize about, and like what are the things in your imagination that maybe someone else planted that you don't really resonate with. If you're I like to use Emily Nagoski's metaphor of your sexuality and identity as a garden within which some plants have been, put there by forces like family, religion, culture, etc., and some that you've planted yourself, and you get to keep what you want to see flourish, and you get to weed out what doesn't resonate with you. And I think it's a gentle and ongoing, and I mean, I think sexual self-discovery is ongoing and infinite. I think even at 99, there's something to learn. So, and I think it can be a sort of comforting to recognize that like nobody has all the answers. There are no single, other than for like this anatomical, scientific, procedural stuff where there's factual answers. A lot of the more subjective things around desire, arousal, identity, you have to figure out your answers. I can't even tell you the answers, but I think that I can help at least make you feel like it's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to experience these feelings or confusions or desires or whatever it is. Like I hope my biggest goals are just to dismantle shame and to make people. I would say that the overarching question that I get is, am I normal? Am I normal? Is my body normal? Are my desires normal? Is my relationship normal? Like all of these various aspects of my life, am I normal? Is the big question that these thousands of people, the more specific questions would fall into if I had an umbrella question. And I just want to be like, of course, we're all like either none of us are not. What is normal anyway? And also, yes, we are either we're all not normal or we're all normal, right? I mean, I don't like the word normal because of the connotation with norm, but you get what I'm saying by using that as the umbrella question, where like, of course, you are absolutely wonderful as you are, is the takeaway.
That's a nice way to, I think that's a nice way to kind of conclude, because I think that the point is that we all wonder if we're normal. And the best part is, I think everyone is. I mean, whatever normal might mean. So with that, I know that we've, sort of reached the end of our time. So I just want to thank you, Leeza. Want to maybe turn it back to the Columbia folks to conclude the session. I want to thank, by the way, just my own 2 bits. Just want to thank Leeza for just being so amazing and launching this platform. I wish I had this resource for when I was in my, early 20s or whatever that time period was as a young Indian woman. I did not have that. We all grew up in a very different era, but I think you're doing an amazing, commendable job. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. And Liz, now I'm going to turn it back to you.
And thank you so much, Gayatri. Gayatri is such a rock star. We should do another event where I interview her because she is amazing. You should check out her book. And Liz is also amazing. I just feel so lucky I get to be on this panel with these amazing women who are championing my work. I feel so grateful. Thank you so much, you two.
Thank you. Well, I actually I'm going to make lentil stew with kielbasa. I love hearing the fireworks for Diwali in the background. Please follow Leeza on her YouTube and Instagram pages, her sex book, and her podcast, Love Matters. Check out Gayatri's book, Changemakers, and her podcast, Uncommon Women. And check out Columbia College Women. I want to thank Leeza and Gayatri on behalf of Columbia College Women and the larger alumni community. Your wisdom and time are a gift to all of us. Thank you to the Asian Columbia Alumni Association, to the South Asian Journalists Association, to Thandi, our Superwoman Director of Alumni Relations, and to you, all of you watching this past hour. Happy Diwali. May the Festival of Lights shine bright for all of you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Diwali.